for the consultative session of what has been, I think, an amazing 3 days, for which we're really grateful to our organizers. So we're starting a little bit early, and I think this is a wonderful sign seeing you all. It might be that you're really fed up with us and you want to get over it with this, but hopefully not, because you want to engage on a really interesting conversations. So let me just, before we start, I'm Caterina Laderchi. I'm the director of something called the Food System Economics Commission, and I'll tell you a little bit more about the Commission in a second. And our other speakers are Vartika. Would you like to just stand up, introduce yourself?
Thank you, Caterina. I'm Vartika Singh. I work with the International Food Policy Research Institute in Delhi, and also IIMA Ahmedabad in Ahmedabad. And I work on the FABLE Consortium activities and FSEC activities and FAO activities in India.
This one is for you. Yeah. And Prantika, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hello everyone, I'm Prantika and I work with IIMA as a senior research officer, and good to have you all. Thank you.
Thank you. And then we will have Ari in a few minutes giving us also a couple of comments on how some of this work relates to some of the things that we have discussed yesterday. So just to start, we have a big title here, The Economics of the Food System Transformation. And this is because the Food System Economics Commission, let me see if I can get the technology to work. No? Nina. Yeah? Oh, sorry. One. There we are. Okay. This is because this presentation has been, this session has been put together by the Food System Economic Commission and FABLE. And the Food System Economics Commission is an independent academic commission composed mostly by economists, but not exclusively. Food systems are very complex and we need expertise from all kinds of disciplines, composed of 18 commissioners. And it is a commission that has been called for by 3 organizations, which hopefully will be familiar to you. One of them is the EAT Foundation, the other one is FOLU, and the other one is the Potsdam Institute of Climate Research. And what I would like to do today is to tell you a little bit more about the Commission and how the work that we're going to discuss later came about, a little bit about our global narrative, and then what we hope to achieve today. So first of all, okay, I hope you think it's just that I'm very jet lagged, and that's why I can't. So. What is the Commission doing? The Commission has been started in the middle of 2020, and as you might remember, that was COVID times, so we had a bit of a slow start. But what we've been doing has been a very large program of research. We have had the freedom to explore a number of really interesting issues and interesting methodologies. Oops. Could that be? Yeah, sorry, if I use the mic and then so it doesn't get in the...
Are you comfortable?
Yeah, sure. Oops. Thank you, sorry about this. So we have this very large program of research. I can tell you later if there is time about the variety of approaches that we have looked at and methodologies. Some of our background papers have already been published. A few more are going to be submitted soon for publications. We did have a perspective in Nature Food trying to illustrate what was the overall approach of the Commission, and we hope to submit to Nature next year a synthesis paper with the main insights of this work. Our biggest deliverable is a policy report, which will be launched next January. So today we're doing a little bit of something which is not allowed, which is we're telling you about a story which has not yet been released. So we will be a bit general, but you are having a preview, and we hope very much to learn from your reactions to this, to see what you think, to learn from how you take it. And then some of the insights of the Commission, you have to think, I mean, this has been a multi-year process. There are 35 background papers, so one report does not convey all what we have to say. So we started creating policy briefs, but focused on specific policy issues or on specific geographies. And you have over there the QR code of a very short India policy brief that should be online by now. It was going to be put online this morning. So what is our story? I hope that nobody will be surprised by this, but especially nobody will be disappointed. You have to think this is a global report. So when you're trying to tell a global story, you end up focusing on a bit of a minimum common denominator. And some of the wonderful discussions we've had over here have really been about details. And so I think it's very complementary with what you can contribute to this. But our basic message is the transformation of food systems is urgently needed. It is possible from a biophysical point of view and also has enormous economic benefits. This was really the central mission that the Commission had, to look at the costs of action and inaction and to assess in a rigorous way which are the costs of the transformations and which are the benefits. And as part of this, we have developed a new, very rigorous methodology to look at the hidden costs of food systems. And those of you who are familiar with the work of FABLE will know Growing Better, which, for example, started putting forward one such estimate. I was one of the authors of that report, and I'm very aware that that was a very remarkable effort, but there were many ways in which the estimates could be refined. So we developed this very rigorous methodology it was developed for us by Oxford University, and we've been really excited because this is the methodology that the FAO uses for its SOFA report, and which also gives you a sense of why we're having these consultations together. So we have this estimate of the hidden cost, from SOFA. They're well over $10 trillion. So the cost of food systems are enormous, and we also looked at the benefits of transforming food systems because we have, thanks to the modeling, we have a sense of how much we could reduce those costs. And so the benefits are really high, and not only they are high, they are way higher than the cost of transforming food systems. So this is a very strong case for saying this is really something that needs to happen. The question is then why this is not happening. So we spent quite a lot of time in thinking not only of policy solutions, but of constraints to making the transformation happen. And so we think that this integration of this long-term modeling on a variety of indicators with policy solutions, which of course, we're very aware, food systems are very local. The kind of expertise that you have about India really tells you need to really know the details. But still, we think there are some entry points which are applicable to, in general. Most countries in the world most probably want to consider these kind of entry points that we have identified. But we also try to look at why it's not happening and what are the things that make this very difficult. And perhaps, in the past we've been very optimistic and said, there is this wonderful things and it's really so beneficial and we really need to make it happen, but we need also to spend a bit of time thinking why it's not happening and what is going to unlock change. And because I think that that's perhaps one of the aspects that we discussed a little bit less recently, came up in the session this morning with Professor Pingali. This is our assessment of some of the major constraints. And we think almost these are things that are either real fears that people or policymakers have, or arguments that people use not to change things. And a big one, food affordability. Say, for example, right now we already have a cost of food crisis. And you start saying, we should really go organics. And people say, the yields are going to go down and this is going to be a disaster, there are going to be pressures on prices. We can't afford it. Our analysis tells us we can afford it in the long run, but of course those things are not visible. A lot of those costs are not visible. And so food affordability remains as a major stumbling block. One is livelihoods. This might not be particularly the case in India, but think of those countries, and there are a few who are major meat exporters. Globally, we know we need to rely less on animal source food. What is that going to mean for some of those countries? That is a massive reallocation of labor, is a massive amount of stranded assets, and we've seen in Europe. You might not have followed this, but there have been recently a couple of countries that, for environmental reasons, have tried to cut down their livestock. And there have been discussions in the Netherlands and there have been discussions in Ireland, and it's all been really ugly. But you have to deal with the livelihoods impact. If you don't have a credible plan, if you say, we'll give you lots of money, we'll work out the details later, people are not going to engage with this. Another major one, global inequalities. Our estimates show that transforming food systems is relatively cheap compared to the benefits that you could have. It's actually, globally, it's really affordable, but it's not affordable for low-income countries, and it's not affordable for many middle-income countries. So this, we know, is a stumbling block in general in all the climate conversations, but there needs to be a way of addressing the fact that if we're interested in transformation happening, we need to find a way of financing it. Market concentration, market power, that's another major one. I'm not familiar exactly with how it is in India, but, in most places where you try to have a reform, the first thing is like business will jump up and say, no, like we can do it ourselves, we can self-regulate, or, there are a number of tactics that are used, that there is lobbying. This depends on different contexts. But unless you address the fact that there are some very powerful players who potentially have to adjust and might not be under pressure to adjust, it's very difficult to unlock the transformation. And for me, something that actually I was really pleased to see, I mean, this has come up so many times in the conversations today, there's policy silos. And the difference is, in some countries is an issue of coordination between the central level and the local one. In some other places, it's a questions of, shared responsibilities between ministries. There is a paper that claims that in India, food system policies are made at 27 departments in different places. And most probably these people don't even know, they don't think of their work as necessarily relating to food systems. They don't necessarily think about coordinating with others. And so this is a big issue. What is a governance model that allows you to bring all these people within government, all their stakeholders outside, to kind of, build together a coherent system? And I've done something very radical here. And the next thing I just wanted to discuss with you, and please remember that this is, Nina, sorry. Okay, I'm courageous. I'm going to tell you. We have identified 5 policy priorities, and I realize they are not necessarily universal. This is one of the big things we want to say. Like policy solutions will change in different contexts. Ta-da! The other one? No. Okay. So these are based on the results of our modeling, based on reviews about policy effectiveness, based on considerations of political economy. These are 5 entry points that we suggest might be considered. And as I said, they might not necessarily be relevant for India, but I hope that later, as we come to discussions on how we can shift food systems in India, you might keep these at the back of your mind. So one is the shifting consumption patterns towards healthy diets. We discussed a lot. Patterns of consumption are already changing, but not in the direction we would want. There are some groups that are much more health conscious that want kind of, healthy food or health food specialties. But our modeling shows that the majority of the benefits of the transformation could already be achieved if people were to eat healthy diets globally. But how do we make that happen? We have a number of little solutions. We don't have perhaps the kind of big systemic solutions that we would need. So this is definitely an area in which we need to engage much more. Repurposing government support for agriculture. This is something we have discussed a lot in all kinds of details. But really, most countries are really supporting their agriculture. They might be doing that in ways which have undesired effects. Policies might have been put in place with certain objectives. It's now time to move on. This is a priority that really lots of countries share. We talk a lot about incentives in the report, and one of the things that we talk about is the need to set up also negative incentives in the forms of environmental taxes. And what is really key is that those resources, this could be a way of financing part of the transformation, but also we need to be very aware of designing those taxes in a progressive way. Innovation. Innovation is, we don't necessarily want to say, lots of people believe that, technology will solve it all. We actually think that there are already lots of really good solutions. It's a question of, diffusions and adoption. But we also need innovation, not only, in general, we talk about the fact that we need to increase productivity, but we also need to think, in the case where there are these negative livelihood effects, we need to be able to create new opportunities for people. So how are those going to come across? And we've seen, for example, at COP, a big emphasis on innovation as well. So this is an area in which perhaps there is new hope. And this one really is one that I don't think it necessarily applies to India, but not all countries in the world are like India in terms of safety nets. Not all countries put food security so much at the center of the safety nets. And so this is, globally, this is a priority. It might be the one perhaps that applies the least. I'm sure that there's a lot that you can do to improve the way your safety nets work in favor of the food system transformation. In lots of countries, there's a question of how do you set it up? How do you make it effective? How do you target those that are in need? So this is, just my preview. I'm sorry. Okay, so this was my preview of our global story, and I don't want to take too much of your time because there's something really interesting now. We have 2 presentations that will look in different ways at the hidden costs in India. And as I said, there is a kind of common methodology behind these numbers but it has been applied in different ways, so they will look at it from different angles. And I think you will find this package of two presentations very interesting together. And what we're really interested in is the idea of can we identify entry points from action from this analysis? So with this, I just like to call, first of all, is there any clarification question for me? I hope not, because everything else is more interesting, but happy to answer a couple of your questions if there is any. Otherwise, I will actually call Harry here a second, because one thing I forgot to say is that we have a number of really wonderful donors that have supported this FSEC program, and one of them has given us some funding for trying to do something a bit unusual, which is to have a global report that tries to engage at the local level. And so we are actually partnering with the FABLE platform in India here and in Brazil to try to see how can these messages of FSEC and the much more details, I hope you realize that I have little time and I can't give you too many details away, but how this kind of detailed insight that we have from FSEC can translate into the local dialogue. And so perhaps, Harry, if you want to come and give us just 2 minutes, or you want to do it later? Yeah? And then we can leave it to Vartika and Prantika who have... Okay, yeah.
Harry, mic is off.
Oh, sorry, so you need this one.
Good afternoon. Hope we had a good lunch, because we don't want to compromise the quality of the food, because we are food and land use coalition. Yeah. So that's wonderful, right? So I would like to start from where Caterina stopped. So when this global development happens, Caterina's approach to countries as so we took it in a little different way than, so how to, still the report needs to come out, so just don't want to get into the details of what we are trying out in India, but how this recommendations which are coming out of this FSEC work can be implemented in a country, and how that can be used in practical for sustainable food system translation. Accelerating sustainable food system transformation is what the task we have taken. And so as part of this, we are doing the ultimate objective is basically, so the prime question which all of us are asking, why it is not happening. So during the last around 20-25 years, the developments in India, if you have seen, civil society organizations, ICAR institutions, Wildlife Institute, many of those institutions have developed enormous amount of knowledge. And there are many models. There are, I would say, if not millions, like lakhs of pilots. And whenever we see this pilots, its impact on local food system transformation, we all say, wow, and then come back and forget about it. So, so we decided to create a platform in India for people to come together, and even a very small effort of an organization or an expert which has an impact directly or indirectly in catalyzing or accelerating the food system transformation, we want to ensure that that's reflected at the national, subnational level. So in precise, maybe 2 minutes I may take more. So what we are trying to do is, a geospatial platform is the base of it, but it's not just the whole of it. So a geospatial platform, like an India map, which you can view as a nation, as states, as districts, or as blocks, and you can click there and you will get the details of those institutions, their work, its impact, and even their knowledge products. So this is the primary way of bringing people together. The second tool is actually the real-time engagement. This year we want to start actually minimum 4 institutions from a state, some 60, 70, organizations and experts. We want to select them carefully, handpick them, and bring them under a single roof, and do a presentation for 2 or 3 days, if not 3, at least 2 days, so that they are not only presenting, they're knowing each other, and we want to set up some small meeting rooms where they can talk to each other and start striking their collaborations. So this is the real-time engagement we want to do, and the outcome is going to be a compendium of activities which are happening. And when we do it every year, this is going to really reflect what happened during last year, and we'll be able to measure the speed of the developments happening. So real interactions, and yesterday we have seen, like, Professor Ramesh Chand's hearing to the people. So we want to create more and more platforms like that. But before making sure who is going to talk to the policymakers, we want to know what they are doing and what's the impact exactly what they want to do. So ultimately, the platform aims to bring people together, collaborate, and leverage the platform for getting the real impact of their work, which they have probably committed to their donors as well. So, leverage the platform to get the impact on the food system transformation, and also collaborate, and also for donors, like, not to replicate the pilots, better adapt. So this is the primary thought. I like exactly like Mr. Antakumar yesterday concluded. It's just in paper. We didn't start it. It's a concept. It's emerging, and basically it's emerging from the overall global work which is coming to India. And yesterday we were thinking, like, once it is starting in India, we can even think about passing the knowledge to Brazil and trying 2 countries. The last point is the fundamental of building that platform is going to be consultation, knowing each other. Like, we want to know people who are all doing in the ground, and directly we may not be able to do. We will have regional institutions, the partners who will take us, and or they will know and they will pass the information to us. So these models are going to be tested and tried, and we will have a huge database of people who are working in different parts of the country, at least state-wise, what they are doing and how much they are involved with food system. Based on those dots, we will make a boundary which we for our work, and based on the type of their work, maybe from 1,000 or 50,000 or 10,000 keywords, we want to narrow down it into 15 or 20, maximum 15 kind of tags, categories, and then create frameworks and all. So this is the overall high-level idea, still getting shaped, and will be refined with your support more. Amit, did you? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Hari. Now we're getting into the real substance.
Thank you. Thank you, Caterina and Hari, for presenting like the broader picture. And can I have my slides, please? Thank you. And the clicker? Thank you. So what I'm going to present here, and maybe we could use the next 45-50 minutes to discuss the SOFA report by FAO, and why it's relevant. As Caterina has already highlighted, we are trying to look at the hidden costs of food systems in India. And the idea to present it in front of all of you here is to get your feedback on the entire process, the methods, the assumptions, and our results, and how best to go about it as we gear towards preparing the next round of FAO's report, which is SOFA 2024. I'm doing this on behalf of the FABLE Consortium. FABLE is Food, Agriculture, Biodiversity, Land Use, and Energy Consortium. So we work on everything, leave nothing behind. And the idea is to capture all of these in the modeling analysis and present it to you. And why FABLE Consortium? Because this is the FAO SOFA report, because as part of SOFA 2024 report, State of Food and Agriculture 2024 report, FABLE Consortium in India is going to work on the analysis that has been done and published in the 2023 report, and try and find levers and pathways and Indian data sources and ways to improve the analysis and tune them well to the India case. And what I'm going to present here has been developed by FAO and Stephen Lord et al. From 2023. This takes heavily from a paper that was published earlier this year by Oxford University. So this is not my work. Feel free to critique as much as you want. Ask any questions, and I will pass them on to Stephen. So what I'll briefly talk about is background of the SOFA 23 report. What was the goal? What was the ambition? For those of you who have looked at it, great. This is a refresher for those of you who are unfamiliar. We'll try to talk down like very basic takeaways and highlights from the report. Then we want to talk about the analysis and what have been the methods used. For those of you who've attended the morning session, already gives you a background of how hidden costs are measured in terms of 3 different indicators. So my job is reduced to some extent. We'll talk about global results from the SOFA 23 report for India. And then how are we thinking about for 2024, and then any open questions that we have, and solicit feedback from you. Neither. this working? Good. Okay. You okay, next slide, please. So the FAO flagship report, State of Food and Agriculture Report 2023 and 24. This is one of FAO's 3 annual flagship reports. And the idea is to inform international policy debates and major issues in agricultural development. These are global reports looking at the state of food and agriculture across regions. Very rarely do they look at country-specific focus. So this one is dedicated, for 2023 and 2024 is dedicated on the hidden costs of food systems and the benefits that can be had from using policy levers and transformation pathways. And this is the first time that there are going to be 2 reports, 2 consecutive years on the same topic. That kind of gives us a sense of the priority in the global space that hidden costs are getting now, and the focus is to also try and do more country level engagement and analysis, like deep dive into certain regions and countries. India is one of them for a lot of reasons. So the SOFA 2024 report is looking at applications of the true cost accounting in different countries, and hence this consultation. So this consultation will support SOFA 2024 activities. Your touch. So for phase 2, what we're trying to get a sense of is whether the results that were published this year make sense for India or not. Like I said, feel free to thrash it down if they don't make sense. But also, like, go a step beyond and say what are the gaps and needs for more in-depth research? What are the areas where we can improve on the analysis? Because these are numbers eventually. The better input we give in terms of numbers, the better output we will get. And then what are the main entry points for reducing hidden costs for India? There's some highlights that this report currently says. These are the 2-3 entry points, but those may not be enough. So we want to use our collective knowledge and experience here to get feedback on what are the things that we should be looking at if the goal is to try to reduce hidden costs for India. So the phase 1 was initial national level assessments, dialogues with stakeholders. Now in phase 2, we are doing in-depth targeted assessments and improved decision making. We are doing this in 6 countries, and in December, all of those countries are doing consultations. And then we'll work on some of the feedback that we get from you. We'll do another round of consultations in January and February, and all of this information with hopefully some improved analysis will be fed into the SOFA report next year. That will be launched in November next year. So for the scope of the analysis, the focus is on hidden costs. And hidden costs, there's some disagreements within economists as well and within policy analysts as well. But the overall idea is that we want to capture costs that are otherwise not presented or featured or accounted for in agricultural production and other exchanges, economic exchanges that happen. So there are externalities that we account for. Externalities are essentially costs that are borne by someone else as a result of my activity. We have plenty of examples of externalities. Something that we can all easily relate to is probably air pollution, because it is someone, not individual, but it's another group or entity that causes pollution, and the impacts are borne by everybody, including the people who've caused it, but also people who had nothing to do with that activity. So we try and capture externalities. And then there are other costs of, like future deficits. So any activities that we're doing at this moment may have negative implications in the future. These are also not always included in global national costing analysis or even national accounting matrices. So the amount of production we do right now may not necessarily cover the impact of reduced water availability in the future, or in changing costs of other inputs in the future, including labor, land, capital, all of those things. So we try and capture these hidden costs using some assumptions and methods that are currently available in the scientific domain. There are various methods of approaching the hidden cost analysis. Again, pros and cons for each of those methods. This is just one method that the FAO has adopted because it has been used in multiple instances, and published and has greater scientific agreement. But that is not to say that this is the only method. Most of you may have seen another method this morning. So just that caveat here. This is an example of negative externality from agriculture. So in areas with extensive agricultural production, and India is an example where there's plenty of nitrogen use, overuse of nitrogen. So there's this nitrogen surface runoff that goes into the water. Then there's soil leaching. And then there's this lake eutrophication, gas emissions through decomposition. There are polluters. These are not necessarily individuals or entities, but like groups. And then the third parties who essentially bear the costs are municipalities, government, users of natural resources, so the communities that depend on those natural resources, and citizens' labor, which also suffer productivity losses from various externalities for that matter. We try and use this economics method to compare values across economies in time, because from India, if I produce a number of hidden costs, that may not necessarily compare with other regions. So the purchasing power parity is a tool that is used to essentially create parity or like generate assessments where we look at what is the cost in local currency of that particular basket and then translate it into costs in US dollars, and then use a discounting rate for future costs as well. Just to, we don't need to get into the details, but the idea is that we create these statistics which are globally comparable, internationally comparable, using available data, because this helps in comparison of costs across countries and to also get a sense of which countries has more costs on a specific aspect versus another. For agri-food systems specifically, the focus is on two types of costs: natural systems and human systems. And they're integrated in the agriculture and food systems perspective, because for human systems, there are costs on labor, input, livelihoods, and dietary, occupational health, and the burden of disease. And for natural systems, there are costs on biodiversity pollution, water reduction, loss of forests, habitat and species loss, and the loss of this. And all of these are, they're linked to one another. So agricultural production, manufacturing, distribution, all of these. So this is the entire food systems space that has been tried to account for in the analysis as well. So splitting between two different systems. Now, once these systems are kind of accounted for, we also try and further classify costs into three types, which is health, social costs, and environmental costs. So health costs are resulting from productivity losses from dietary patterns, consumption, but also account for burden of disease due to dietary patterns. And I'll get to that in a while on how they are calculated, essentially. Social costs, again, burden of disease due to undernourishment, malnutrition, poverty, agri-food worker poverty. These two costs are essentially due to institutional failure, because there are information asymmetries, there are access asymmetries, all of these. And the environmental costs are essentially due to externalities, such as nitrogen use that causes water pollution, air pollution. There's land use change, so conversion from forest land to grassland to cropland, things like that. There's blue water withdrawal for agriculture. That also has costs in the present and in the future. And then greenhouse gas emissions, which is all sorts of gas emissions from production, pre and post-production, crop production, and land use change. So these environmental costs are essentially due to externalities. This is just the classification. And then across the food value chain as well, we try to capture how these costs are. So the green one are environmental costs across all the sectors, across all the entire chain of agri-food production system. So there's greenhouse gas emissions from fertilizer production, from land use change, from nitrogen emissions on the soils, habitat loss. Then there's energy use in transport, processing, packaging, waste, food retail, so refrigeration and waste at the level of the urban food centers. There's greenhouse gas emissions from household energy use, food consumption, so like cooking, fuel, and all of that. And then there's food waste and wastewater and nitrogen emissions from sewerage. Yes. Not yet, no. Because, agree. Because machinery also not very high energy use. There's fuel related, not electricity. Yeah, fuel, yeah. Okay, thank you, that's a good point. For health costs, there's burden of disease due to diets, and for social costs, there's poverty among those unemployed.
This emission from fertilizer production is basically what we are talking about is the
Industry level.
Industrial.
Yes, and then application and other things also come in. Yes, yes.
So are we really calculating
Sorry.
if the biomanure is being used, like the cow dung and all? Are we using the methane emission from that?
There's no statistics on use of biomanure, so unfortunately, yeah.
You mean you don't have data on it?
On the extent of biomanure use in fertilizer application in India, like at the national level, there's like
It's production. Segment is a production.
I have, okay, for production I've not looked at it. If there's, yes, but that, so that status, fertilizer production statistics are available, yes. Biomanure, I'm not sure. I don't want to comment, sorry.
Because this is also coming as a discussion when shifting into the.
No, good, okay.
Just the previous slide. So the health cost which we are talking about, it's only talking about the burden of disease due to dietary patterns. But the production also causes a lot of health hazards,
Yes,
especially in terms of groundwater contamination leading to cancer and all that, which has a very high health cost.
yes, exactly. So that is accounted for. I mean, this is due to dietary patterns because the idea is to say that there's undernourishment and obesity and overweight and all of those things. But the calculation essentially uses the global burden of disease framework, which has all of these aspects included in it. So the loss in productivity from getting high, like diabetes for that matter, that is also accounted for. Loss in productivity from, so I'll just maybe go to that, which is the indicator is essentially DALIs. I'll get to that maybe, but this is important because this is the one where we need like most feedback on. So the idea is to look at hidden costs, impact quantities and the unit cost to GDP. That's a monetary measure. And for that, the current analysis of the 2023 report uses the following data sources. So the first one is the impact quantities. So information and data on indicators on GHG emissions from agri-food production in a country are obtained from FAO Stat. Disability adjusted life years, that is the indicator that is used to measure disease impact and productivity losses from dietary patterns. Then there's conversion of forest and unmanaged grassland, agri-food system worker productivity headcount coming from the World Bank, which uses this productivity, poverty threshold. Then blue water for agriculture use coming from Aquastat. Headcount of population with food intake below minimum energy requirements, again FAO Stat, although we have some India statistics on that too. Runoff of reactive nitrogen into surface waters and soil leaching from Image GNM, this is a global model. Whatever, of ammonia coming from Edgar. And then we have these, the unit cost of GDP for all these sources are also obtained from US EPA. SpeakFS is a model as well. Then there's social costs of labor productivity losses. This is a very important indicator, and we're currently, as in the current report, uses ILO data and some of other assessments from Oxford University. Then there are marginal costs per hectare of land use change from loss of provision of natural ecosystems. This is again based on some modeling framework. Income shortfall per annum from World Bank data and some other calculations. And then some other information on SpeakFS and WHO data. So these are the indicators and unit costs that are currently used in this assessment. And what we want to do is improve on those using data that are currently available for a lot of these indicators in India that helps us better capture, although some of the calculations will remain the same, this whole conversion into US dollars, PPP, and other economic assessments. But there are ways in which, at least if not for all, one or two indicators that we can essentially feed in and help improve the analysis, that would be most welcome. So this is where I wanted to explain on the how diet impacts on economic costs are calculated. So DALIs is this indicator which is disability adjusted life years, essentially captures disease burden and shortening of life essentially. Data from this are obtained from the global burden of disease for 87 risk factors and combinations, and I'll also show how that, what is the case in India. And so this is like a global database, but gets into quite a lot of detail for countries at that level. So DALYs are multiplied by the dollar value of productivity losses from dietary patterns, and this productivity losses are obtained from ILO, which also has country level data on what would productivity loss for an individual in India be like. Again, calculated at a higher level, but it's available for India at the moment. So that gives us this total cost of burden of disease due to dietary choices that has impacts on health and your other statistics. So this is the example of burden of disease from India. So DALY, as I said, it's years lived with disability plus years of life lost compared to how much you would have lived otherwise. So this years lived with disability is affected by risk factors that drive death and disability combined, and then risk factor on exposure by age, sex, and location. And then years of life lost are also based on population dynamics. So these are the figures for India, and unfortunately not very clear. But so this one is talking about which are the major factors or drivers of DALYs in India, and malnutrition and air pollution. So first is malnutrition, and the second is air pollution. For India, so most deaths, and that is like the major burden of disease for India. Population dynamics, this is forecasted on what is the life expectancy of males and females for the future, and how our population is going to change by age, sex, and class. So all of these calculations for India are accounted for, and that gives us this DALY number, which is used to calculate the health cost of food systems in India. And as I will show later, that is the major cost that we're currently seeing for India. This is a figure of how DALYs are split across regions. So the one on the top left is DALYs attributed to child and maternal malnutrition. And as you can see, some parts in India, they feature in red, which is quite high, especially like this Indo-Gangetic Basin belt. And then the bottom one is due to dietary risks. And India is somewhat there in between, not quite bad, but there's still a very high level of dietary risks present as well. Then I do not want to get into the details of how each of these statistics have been calculated, but if there's interest, feel free to like pause and ask. But similar to how we calculated life, like productivity losses from burden of disease, we calculate the costs of greenhouse gas emissions due to economic costs. So social cost of emissions are from productivity losses in agricultural production, and then from higher mortality due to heat stress because of climate change and greenhouse gas emissions that's going to affect DALYs in the future. And then greenhouse gas emissions from on-farm production, from pre and post-production, from land use and land use change. Each of these factors are also accounted for in terms of carbon equivalents, and then multiplied with the dollar value to give us the total hidden costs from greenhouse gas emissions.
So basically, one, just pointing out here, general comments will come later after, but
Sure.
here in this climate impact, what we are realizing, the photo realizing, and we are thinking about investing because this kind of information are not available. There's a huge impact of increasing extreme weather events on, in agriculture. So basically, when we say, like, see, this is how are we factoring, or how are we, agriculture is only in India 14% of the overall emission. But when we say this emission, cost of emission, how all this social cost of emission, how this apportioning and all happening, is it really happening? Why we are asking is, last point is, why we want to invest in it is like, we want to understand what is the real climate impact on the livelihoods of farmers.
Just farmers or like overall? Because
No,
then it's
that's-
possible to distinguish those two.
Foru's interest is on farmers, but there are huge impact, like the Chennai.
Yes,
huge
exactly,
impact on the
exactly. So like I said, the calculation of the cost in terms of productivity, so that ILO gives us what is the cost of individual labor for that matter, in terms of like dollar terms. And then we say, what is the loss? Because people would have lived so much longer, but because of all these effects of greenhouse gas emissions and climate change and heat stress and water stress and everything included, this is the mortality rate approximately. And like I said, malnutrition and air pollution, these are like two higher ups. There are more there. I'm missing, I don't know if Fabrice wants to add what are the other factors, but there's like diabetes and other sources of burden of disease, yes, all going up. So these are the factors, and they don't necessarily affect farm workers only. This is like the global burden of disease is India level, like the country level analysis, including all the sectors. So we try and map those into dollar terms and get that value. Now, what would be nice, I completely agree, is to be able to capture these locally, like those values, in terms of like getting those parameters and coefficients right in the case of India, as to, especially from this farm activity, what is the productivity loss or burden of disease equivalent, that we can quantify this much better.
Not even the productivity,
yeah.
I'm actually asking about the damage. Because, the damage is here also in the health.
Human damage.
Human the infrastructure, like, once a flood happens or a cyclone happens, it takes actually millions, if not billions, to recover. That's number one. And second is like in the health, always what we can see is, I don't know, correct me if I'm wrong, like we are just orienting towards that economic productivity rather the public expenditure in health. Like in India, when people are becoming sick, like Shailesh was mentioning, the overall increase in, I don't know how much scientific evidence we have to connect this pesticides with cancer and all, but if that is not getting factored in, generally we will get the large, what do you call it, as a normal, the common people shown in these reports. Like when last time I have been asked by someone, like, are you really factoring these things in these global reports? Like when we thought the 2019 growing better, we did the same thing, right? The health impact. Yeah. So somebody was asking, like, are you factoring these things? So actually not well. So here also it's an issue.
I fully agree, and I think you also mentioned that is to the extent that data and research is available to justify those linkages. I think that's a major challenge, and that's probably going to be my answer for everything. Sorry?
Let me add to what Ari mentioned here. In fact, the overall, I think I can speak louder. See, the focus on this has been, as you mentioned, is on the economic primarily. But then there are other hidden costs. Like as I said, the health issue is one of them. So let me take a live example. Let's say we have right now in Sikkim, right, and then in Chennai, the recent floods. So the impact of that could be so much more deeper. It could go not only the economic, but also in terms of the next two generations could possibly experience the impact of it. Has that been factored into the formulas as well? And then, because that would set a precedence when you make such reports, and then the policies will be formed according to these, if they take into consideration. Then you have more and more costs as well arising out of it. So the definition of the cost itself have to be addressed at the very outset. Thank you.
No, thank you for the comments, and that is, to some extent, I would say we're already trying to answer that through our FSEC analysis, which is also looking at future costs, because these are costs as of present, but a lot of things might and would change in the future by 2050. So we are trying to look at how things would be in 2050 using similar assumptions, but also looking at different pathways through which some of these costs can be reduced. So to some extent, I would say health costs, social costs, economic costs are accounted inside, like in this analysis, using proxy estimations of the best indicator that is available. There's definitely some gaps in it that we can always like feedback in and say that perhaps we should try and consider those for India. Yeah. Okay. Land impacts. Land impacts and economic costs of those have also been accounted for. So land use change as a result of human activity, but also as a result of agri-food production systems, so conversion to and from forest to croplands and pastures, and conversion of unmanaged grasslands to croplands and pastures. So any changes that we make in croplands have their own costs. And then the dollar values obtained from marginal costs of land use change. These are calculated from loss of provision of ecosystem services. There's some distinction between tropical and temperate forests, but I would say the estimations are also very high level, and these numbers can also be improved in the terms of marginal cost of land use change, especially from the Indian context. And using this formula, we arrive at land use changes costing. Similarly, for water, the cost of what is the value of blue water currently in use, and what would be the potential cost of water scarcity and damages in the future. So as I said in the beginning, future deficits are accounted for in the analysis. So if there were loss of environmental flows in the future, that has impacts on biodiversity conservation, and what would be the impact on agricultural losses and productivity losses. So that loop also has been accounted for, and that gives us cost values for water. Undernourishment impacts to, so prevalence of undernourishment in the terms of number of people who are currently undernourished, so head count with a national population with food intake below minimum dietary energy requirements. And then what are the marginal costs of undernourishment? This again comes from the productivity losses, because how do you assign a dollar value of undernourishment, and what is that cost? So the concept that is used here is protein energy malnutrition that affects productivity in the future. And I mean, the social costs of undernourishment are not accounted for in this as straightforwardly. They're captured indirectly. But the idea is that if people are undernourished, they won't be as productive as they would have otherwise been. They will not live long as they otherwise would have. So what are the productivity losses from that to get us the dollar value for that? And that gives us the costs of undernourishment for the analysis. And similarly for poverty. So what is the poverty gap, and what would that be to meet the income shortfall per annum? This is assuming that everyone, that it's all fair if everyone is able to meet the poverty threshold. We can get into a conversation about how that may not be sufficient in itself, but at least for now, for this preliminary analysis, the idea is what is the cost of conversion of poverty gaps into like covering up the cost of poverty for that matter. Nitrogen, again, because nitrogen has a whole lot of, it features in a lot of places. So ammonia and nitrous oxides from air due to agri-food production systems, and then runoff of reactive nitrogen into surface waters and soil leaching. So this is an externality, and we capture in nitrogen units per kg, and then costs are calculated in terms of what are the labor productivity losses due to air and water pollution. Crop losses are accounted for, so excessive nitrogen use that kind of results in crop losses, and then loss of ecosystem services as well. That gives us the nitrogen emissions costing. So this is just different ways in which nitrogen features. But this is a figure that I wanted to keep to show nitrogen deposition, because if you see India and China, they have the highest nitrogen deposition in the world, and parts of the US and some parts of Europe too, to some extent. But
What is nitrogen deposition?
Nitrogen in the soil, in the air, in the water. Yeah.
The point is, okay, nitrate is what you mean. Is it
So converted into N overall, all forms, N2O, NO3.
These are actually, this number is it's really, because nitrogen in the soil, I don't think it's a problem, right? Is it?
Nitrogen surplus is a problem, yes, because there's soil and water leaching, yes, surface runoff.
Sorry.
Yeah.
I was thinking like carbon in the soil and carbon.
No, it's the surplus from overuse of fertilizers and
Yeah.
some other aspects. So
Yeah.
we do the subtraction between what is required and what should not be
Excess.
required.
Yeah.
And that is the surplus.
Yeah. And I keep it here because that features quite prominently in Indian hidden costs, for that matter. So very quickly, just one slide on what are the global results. And these numbers talk about globally hidden costs from agri-food systems are about $12.7 trillion US 2020 PPP. This is about 10% of global GDP. Now, this is not an absolute number, because like all analysis, there are uncertainties, estimates. So the global cost range between 11 to 15 trillion, and averaging out, this is a number that has been presented. So most costs come from health hidden costs, amounting to about 9 trillion USD PPP, and that is attributed to unhealthy dietary patterns, obesity, non-communicable diseases, which lead to productivity losses and then impact the economy and the dollar value. Social hidden costs are about 4% of the total, but they feature majorly in low-income countries. And then there are about 2.9 trillion environmental hidden costs, of more than half pertain to nitrogen emissions. And this is mostly from runoff to surface waters, so excessive leaching from soils to waters, and ammonia emissions to air. So this is the global. But what we see for India, and I'm sorry for this non-creative slide, India has the highest health impacts, followed by social, and then environmental, kind of following the global norm. But there's a figure on compared to lower middle income countries as well. But the costs for India are in the range of 1.5 trillion USD PPP. This is about, I'm forgetting the exact number, but this is about 100 times more than the budget of the PDS scheme, at least, if not more. So these costs, if we take them in principle or as is, then the value can be compared in that manner, like one of the largest schemes in India. And if we say that if we were to account for these hidden costs in the future, roughly putting it there, Indian GDP would be 16.1% lower in the future, not the future, but in PPP terms, our GDP would be much lower if these hidden costs were accounted for in the economy. Now, majorly they are coming from the triple burden of unhealthy diets. We're growing faster, and the burden of disease is also growing at the same pace. There's significant burden on agri-food worker productivity and hunger. Sorry? Yes, that's like the second factor because of which we see all these hidden costs. And then there's damage to blue water resources and significant end damages, which is like India is the second largest nitrogen user. And then untreated human sewage as significant runoff is also another important factor that drives these results. This is a figure that shows, so the second bar, I try to, oops, okay, no, not there. Yeah. No, I wanted to show the clicker, okay. And I lost it. I have one more slide, so that's fine. I only have one more. No, because there's no slide. They're trying to get it back.
Well, hold on, Hari. I think that the folks in the back are trying to get back.
Yes. Okay.
I'm here, Savior.
We can talk about that later. So this is like the full health, social, and environmental costs. The breakup, if you're not able to see the numbers, the health costs are about 580. Again, I am also not able to see. $588.9 billion, 2020 PPP, followed by social costs due to poverty and hunger, and then these are the environmental costs. Now, if we do the further breakup, which is this last bar here, health costs, again, primarily due to productivity losses, but between social costs, there is undernourishment and poverty. Poverty is the major driver to some extent. And then these are the environmental costs, which it may not be entirely clear here, but blue water withdrawal, and then emissions from nitrogen feature prominently. So from human sewerage and surface water and runoff to surface water. So these are the current hidden costs for India, split across these various indicators. Compared to other lower middle income countries, we see that, so this is India and this is the other lower middle income countries. The trend is kind of similar. So this big blue bar is dietary patterns that contributes to more than 50% of the hidden costs. And then this is poverty and nitrogen, which feature next. And this is again India versus other lower middle income countries, where major costs are health, followed by social and environment. So to avoid these hidden costs in the future, and this is how our activities on the SOFA report align with the FSEC pathways, is that, okay, we present these numbers, but what do we do about it? What are the ways in which we could try to reduce some of these hidden costs? So as part of the Food Systems Economics Commission activity, we've tried to develop some pathways, assuming fundamental changes in food production and food consumption between 2020 and 2050. And then we implement scenarios in MACPI model. My colleague Prantika will talk about it, the FSEC pathways and what are the changes we see in hidden costs as a result of transitioning to those pathways. But very high level, we see that it is possible to reduce some of these costs by about 26%, leading to approximately 57% reduction in hidden costs by 2050 compared to the current trends or to the baseline. So then, this is all that I had to present. There are some open questions for all of you. We've received some comments in between, but what we'd really like to hear from you is how do these numbers align with what we know or our existing knowledge, and what are the things that we could look into or account for. Just note that we'll need data or existing evidence to kind of inform some of these analysis, because one-off instance in one case or one village does not really help in the analysis, because these are very high-level analysis. So as much as I value those data or that kind of research, what would be really nice is to think at state level, national level, what are the data sets available that can help us inform some of these analysis. If you think perhaps a certain formula needs to be changed or a certain assumption needs to be changed, we could also talk about that. And then limitations or something that you would highlight. Because as I said, this will feature in next year's SOFA report. So what we discuss now is quite crucial, and we are taking notes and we are going to act upon it. So we spend the next 15-20 minutes on conversation, then break for tea, and then we have Prantika's presentation.
I want to make a couple of good comments which we are facing now and we have identified in the food sector. Which we have identified in this sector. First is this emission numbers, especially livestock. Since we don't have the tier 3 data, just a month back, the WRI globally had Africa, India, a gathering about the efforts which we are doing to reduce the emissions from the livestock sector. What we understand is maximum what we have is tier 2, and maximum we have is tier 1, and in a few instances tier 2 and not even tier 3. So, even when we try to estimate the total emission from the livestock sector, we are actually scientifically not sure whether this is a number. And very recent studies about the methodology of estimating itself from the African pastoral lands is basically what's the baseline. What happens, these areas are not grazed by ruminant livestock, then either wild ruminants are coming or the termites are coming, then what is the opportunity of emission from there? That's more or less the same, and very clearly scientifically they have proved. So one is the tier 3 data, just to multiply the emission factors is not available. Second is the methodology. These two how we are factoring in. The other things I told you, sometimes the infrastructure or the economic loss because of the increasing extreme events are much higher than what we are estimating. So at least 14% of that, because the agriculture and land emission comes to 14%. If 14% of that is taken in account of this food production, then again the loss is going to be very high. So at one end, sometimes there's an opportunity for the cost to go down. At another end, there is an opportunity for the cost, going down. So finally, just consolidating, these 2 points into your question, how much it can be used. It seems like, as a global report, it must be fine, but it needs to be complemented by a proper Indian report. And this kind of reports, if can highlight these caveats, it will be easy for the financing or funding agencies to put their effort in getting the tier 3 data, because no one, if takes tier 3 data, people are going to agree. ICR institutes only will have to do that. So if an NGO goes and do it, it's not going to really reflect. So to get those kind of efforts, even sometimes it will reduce India's overall emission. It's going to be beneficial for the country sometimes. So can these caveats come in this report so that it's people like us, when takes, can refer to a solid FAO publication?
About the emissions till farm gate, are we taking into consideration the emissions from electricity use and irrigation? Irrigation, yes. Okay. So that then would be about 21% of India's GHG inventory, if not just GHG inventory, like A4 plus.
Sorry. So my question, it's like a comment or question order. I want to go back to Catherine's slide, which the one you made. That shift considered the shifting consumption pattern to healthier diet as a presumption, and another presumption was that the cost for transition will be much lesser than the hidden cost for the cost of production, right? But here I want to play the devil's advocate, because we considering the hidden cost for transition here. It has to be discounted. Like if we are talking about the food platter of 2050, we are not even talking about the food platter of Generation Z. We are talking about the Generation Alpha there. So how we are going to count that in our, because food, there was an exhibition yesterday which was curated by a food artist. It came to my mind that actually food is not about production, marketing, not even culture, it is about memories. The most of the money, the millions of dollars are spent by multinationals for the retention micromolecules. If we want that the generation, because the competition is very high, if they want to go back to Starbucks again and again, that taste in their mouth should demand it. They are spending millions on that micromolecules. So hidden cost, the awareness, to take that barrier and to break that barrier, the awareness cost we need about consumption is going to be humongous on one side, and very, very proper, very something. Another one is this, the limited shelf space on the markets. Whether it is virtual market or supermarket, there are only very few limited space. And these are Insta kits, we are talking, or some other platform will come, and they are exposed to all these kinds of cuisines, and that is again infused in our culture, and also they are going to, we are competing for that space. The healthy diet is competing for that space, and what will be the cost for that? For that also the marketing team is spending a lot to gain that space. How to break these two things? That will cover in the hidden cost for transition. I wanted to, in future, it should be better to take into account.
Sorry, just a couple of quick points on that. We think that the economic case for the food system transition is very strong. And all these calculations, of course, they're based on pathways to 2050. They're based to, when we look at the cost of interventions, we're looking at the best possible data we could find about interventions. And I actually, I always tell my colleague, what I would really love is someone to say, no, your estimates are rubbish, I can do them better. I'm still confident we would have a very strong economic case, because we are looking at an order of magnitude about 30 times. So, it's just the benefits are so much more massive that, we might have got it wrong by 1 trillion or 2 trillions. There is still a massive economic case, no? So that's one question. On the specifics of healthy diets, I think that's one area where we really need a lot of innovation in terms of thinking what is going to work, because we have a lot of evidence. We have really rigorous analysis of policy effectiveness on relatively small interventions, which are really crucial for health, but they're not going to be the systemic change we want to see. No, let's say, one thing I took from the discussion this morning, there is this kind of cluster of policies in India, which is kind of pushing diets to go in a direction which is not healthy. We talked about people not eating the fermented millet porridge anymore, and they eat, like European-style bread for breakfast, and that's not what they need. That's not or American style. I'm saying the blame. But anyway, that is not, that is not healthy for them. Now, how do we change that whole system? That, you could say, well, it actually costs very little, because you just need someone to say, we're going to rewrite all the, rewriting rules is not that difficult. You obviously know that the implementation of those things is incredibly complicated. So I think we need to keep these two things in mind. Is, in a way, the basic message is there is a really strong economic case for making this change happen. We need to discuss at the country level exactly what we need to do to remove those barriers, and what are the kind of investments that we need to we need to have. And one thing which I think we didn't really discuss is the role of business in all of this. Like a lot of these unhealthy offerings, or it comes from what is provided by Starbucks. Comes from what is provided. And so how do we actually get them to try to internalize the need for improving what they're providing, so that in a way they kind of address the needs of consumers. There is all the modern and cool and whatever else that attracts people to that food, but at the same time it's actually not destroying their health as they're eating. So I think, to me, the numbers in the end, I mean, this is fascinating analysis. Stephen, it's a kind of world leader in this type of analysis. He spends his life coming up with really detailed estimates. To me personally, what in the end, like the little differences between these numbers, the possible differences between our number, which is all based on on one of those databases, versus the FAO numbers, that's not really, we agree. The costs are massive. We can actually do it. We have the solutions. So I think it's more like, let's find 4 like this ones where we discuss, okay, concretely, how do we unravel all the constraints?
Thank you. Maybe we'll give it to the lady at the back first.
Yeah, I just have one minute. Is it 16%, 16 point something percent as cost is just, you just have to stop doing agriculture. The contribution of agriculture to GDP is 16. Just shun agriculture, everything will be fine. I don't think these numbers would be taken by any policymaker. I'm so sorry, but
no.
I'm just, when I see these kind of numbers, it disturbs me a lot.
Yeah.
So we just have to shun agriculture, and that's the solution.
So this is not just agriculture, but agri-food systems.
No, agri-food systems comes from agriculture. The base is agriculture, right? So I think you need to look at your model. That's for sure. Yeah. What I feel is you look at I don't know how you estimated the marginal nitrogen damages or whatever. How did you have a production function from where you looked at the nitrogen?
So nitrogen value.
So you just looked at these are the marginal numbers, marginal nitrogen damages.
Marginal cost
How did you
of
estimate
damages.
that marginal nitrogen damages?
So due to loss in labor productivity, due to air pollution?
No, but what is the model that you used? How did you get the marginality? It's a dy by dx from the model, right? That's a marginality. So, yeah.
SPEAK. I think it's SPEAK. Yeah, I think this is the SPEAK FS model. I have. So
that's not the marginality. It's not the quantity into unit cost cannot be marginal. That can't be called as marginal nitrogen actually.
Marginal cost from
marginal is basically incremental changes, delta y by delta x. Yeah. Right? So you need to understand what is the contribution of nitrogen to the entire production process. If I can get the number, then I call that as a marginal number, right? Otherwise, it's not marginality. Like it's just the back of envelope calculations. So I think there's some problem because 16% is just too much. We just have to say that we have to stop eating food and we'll be healthy. There are no hidden costs.
Yeah. So I don't know the details of the model that has been used.
But the Indian numbers are too disturbing. I mean, it's too disturbing actually. I can say that.
So what we'd really like to do is get a sense of what those Indian numbers because these are, again, like I said, there are uncertainty estimates. So what we're presenting is also just averages.
No, but still, I think the models have to be closer to the reality. That's my suggestion. Please have a look at your model. Yes. This is definitely not even closer to the reality.
Sorry, but just one point. I mean, I really enjoyed your presentation this morning using the TEEB model, no? And there, of course, you're very explicit about the benefits. What I think it's different here is that there is a big focus on the cost because that's what is generally not
that's
seen.
what my benefits should not exceed the gross contribution to agriculture, right? So, but the benefits minus cost is 0. That's what I'm saying.
But you could say that the benefits are underestimated because what you're looking at is that food systems are much more than
no. That thing is by meaning benefits are being measured in the GDP system somewhere. Like suppose there is a chain, there is a value addition there. Everything is adding up, right? So that is 16.27% of GDP.
Yes, but the GDP estimate does not look at the positive externality.
Contribution to GDP.
No. What I'm just saying is like we often scale these things by GDP to give it a sense. Like I always say, my brain is too small. All these big trillion numbers, I can't picture them. If you give them to them as a share of GDP, but that's not the relevant metric in a way. No, that's just the scale. that we're giving. Because having someone nourished, what is the value of that life? It's not in GDP. It's not in these estimates.
Now, how do we
It's not in
estimate the value of life then? No, see, there is, I'm just saying, my just feeling is this number will basically, if you present this to the policymaker, it'll say, just stop doing agriculture. That's basically what I feel. Because the net benefits from agriculture are zero. Yeah.
So I think the 16% probably, this is not 16% of GDP. This is saying that if we accounted for those costs, our GDP would be 16% lower than what it is.
That means that's the same thing, right? 16% is a deficit. It's quite large number. You know what is Indian GDP like? It's quite large. Please have a look at the numbers, please. These are quite large.
Thank you.
Can you please go to that? I'll take it from
This one?
I'll continue where the esteemed lady, my colleague, stopped off. GDP is definitely not the metric that the whole world, I think we have gone down the drain. It's an insult to our collective human intelligence to measure nations' growth just by GDP alone. But again, to take the numbers from what she said, it's not 16%. You'll be surprised it'll be 3 times that of the agricultural contribution to the Indian GDP, just to follow on the academic curiosity. Now, let me get back to the meat of the arguments. See, the numbers definitely play a game, but then to whose interest? So let's talk about being equitable. In the formula here, can you go back to the slide wherein you have the first slide, I believe, which used the economic drivers for your presentation? Yes, thank you. Now, if you notice that, apart from economic, can you please, yes, that's it. Do you see anything else apart from that which talks about the quality of life, the health, anything else? In totality, it's missing. This is what you exactly find in the World Bank's reports and the creme de la creme institutions which drive the policies worldwide and also certain nations as well. So I'm very critical when it comes to this, because we're not comprehensive in this manner. For instance, where are we responsible in this to drive policies which suits the countries, the nations in their local data-driven policies or a framework that we need to construct? That's entirely missing out of here. The tier 3, I think Hari stepped out. He would have loved this. Because tier 3 data is what you require from down, not secondary, tertiary data. So for instance, I'll give you, in our organization, we go ourselves. We don't rely on secondary data at all. So that was one question why I keep bringing on. We have several disasters on our hand at the moment that we are engaged in actively, and I would need every brilliant mind that could come in and assist us. But where is data? So, I can scour the ends of the earth to it, but we can't find enough data. So how can we base reports like this? Then you would lose validity and credibility. Forget about acceptance of it. So if we go on the existing model, we would be doing a disservice to generations to come. Then again, that'll become a disaster in itself. Sorry to say, as the lady said, I have to play the devil's advocate sometimes as well. And last but not the very least, a comprehensive approach. So I would say, please take the experts. Experts there in possibly every single tier 3 cities and villages and hamlets that you could go to. Talk to them. You can get data from them. It's expensive, very expensive. But is it worth it? Damn good, worth it. Thank you.
Okay, I'll move on to the next one because I want to respond, but there's no time.
Please go.
What? Okay. Does anyone else have a comment? Okay, good. There's like so many things that we want to talk about, but maybe we first go into the presentation that my colleague Prantika has on how we are looking at reducing some of these costs. And like I said, we are looking at these numbers, but there are also ways to tune those numbers using certain pathways. But first we break for tea for 15 minutes. Chief Auditor, is tea ready?
Yeah, just a minute.
Sorry. has told it would be at this time.
Vartika's session is over. So she's asking should we no, so
Side conversation,
Vartika's is
we
remaining.
should just go ahead and collect more data, get more donors to get more data. I don't want to be like officially 3 strategies. Yes, yes. Sure. So, I mean, as we saw, and I mean, this was not like surprisingly new, was health costs. So, dietary patterns were some of the major drivers of costs. So, we've created some pathways that look at reduction in undernourishment, malnutrition, poverty, all of these transformations separately and together as a bundle to see what is the extent by which costs can be reduced. If positive policy actions were to work in those directions, then we've also looked at some scenarios where we reduce nitrogen surplus, because that is also another major driver of costs, and what are the cost savings from that as well. So we've run a few scenarios using this model that has also been used to run some of these numbers as well. Yeah.
I wanted to ask, who are the people who are
So, who are the people who are bearing these costs, and who are the ones who are causing these costs, if we have some disaggregation on that?
Very good question. Everyone is bearing these costs because collectively these are hidden costs of our consumption of the agri-food systems within the country, and also some of the food that we produce for export versus some of the food that we import. So quite a lot of those activities are captured here, so anyone who's engaged in those activities bears the cost. It's just like not, so my consumption only affects me at this moment, but it affects someone else's production decisions, which we don't know, which is why this whole concept of hidden versus visible costs. So I don't think it's possible to distinguish that clearly who bears.
globally we know this like over-consumers are causing a lot of the problem, and everyone is
Under consumption as well, yes, yeah, not necessarily. Yeah, so like climate change affects everybody.
And we all are contributors to it as well.
Exactly.
But some contribute more, and the poor bear greater cost, maybe not because the burden is higher, but because the access to response options is much lower. So the wealthy have ways of escaping the poor don't. So in that sense, yeah, the burden is on the poor.
Disproportionately further.
Okay, tea is ready, and we can try to come back in 10, max 15 minutes. Thank you.
After this exciting tea break, I hope you had lots of nice conversations to build on what we discussed before. And we will have Prantika. Will you? Sorry. You were going to. Sorry, no. We're going to do the calling for you.
So finally, the big time to reveal what we have been hiding since morning. And here we go. So the hidden cost of food system. So before starting the presentation, I would like to mention clearly that whatever we present here are 2050 projections, which we have discounted for the 2020 values. So this might be high, might be low. Let's see what's in store. But yeah. Just a brief background. We all know that food system is a complex system which engages several dimensions. For example, the health, the political economy, the social part, and also the environmental part. And it entails multiple dimensions which are also overlapping systems. And then we all know that we actually need high level of coordination and integration between all of these dimensions to bring systematic and transformational change so that we reach or achieve a sustainable future in the future. While in India specifically and also in globally, policies aligning with these dimensions exist for now, but they are all in silos and they are acting on different spaces, different dimensions differently, but we need one integrated system management of all these policies, which can truly transform us to a sustainable future. So what inaction at present can lead us to a future is what we try to show in our hidden cost assessment. And again, none of this work is only ours, so please feel free to criticize, because we work in group and we are presenting 2 out of a combined work. One is the FSEC and the other is Stephen Lord's assessment with FSEC outcomes. Lucky with the pointer. So yeah. The key objectives here is quantify the interaction effects between food system measures, or what we say food system interventions, across the 4 dimensions which we specifically consider here, that is the health, environment, society, and the economy. We uncover the potential synergies and trade-offs underlying with these interventions, and when these specific interventions act individually and also together into policy bundles or in an integrated form as a package. We identify levers of change for transformation, as in which intervention or which measure is actually needed at this point to identify and lead us to a sustainable food system. We unreveal the future hidden costs of food system, and we also identify the potential to avoid this hidden cost, or the potential to minimize this hidden costs. So the basic analytical framework, again, if you see the modeling framework on the left side of the slide, this is again a biryani, both veg and non-veg. I know many of you will not be able to understand, but the central model for this is the MACPI model. We believe in sharing and borrowing from modeling also. So we have shared and borrowed from different other models to answer the different indicators we address here, which is poverty outcomes, the environmental outcomes, and also the health and economic outcomes. But the central model over here is the MACPI model, which is the land and food system model. Just a brief of the MACPI model. Details, if anyone is interested, you can see the website. This is an open access, open source model. MACPI is actually a global agricultural model, and in this we optimize the land use patterns subject to agricultural demand. The key objective function is a cost minimization function. Cost minimization in terms of minimizing the cost of producing food and livestock, which is expected to meet the future demand of food, and also we also account for the environmental costs. We include crop, livestock products, and also processed products. These are spatially explicit, and it's a global model. We include India as an individual region in this model. Technological change is endogenous in the model, and agriculture and land use change emissions are one of the variables. Climate change mitigation is also accounted. So for this specific exercise, which we see in the hidden costs and also the FSEC costs, we have in total evaluated 23 food system measures or interventions, and also 5 transformation levers outside the food system. When I say outside the food system, I specifically mean the changes in the socio-economic development brings, for example, a slow population growth, a sustainable energy transformation, or a socio-economic development overall, or moving to a bioeconomy, which is outside the food system, and many other things. So we specifically account of 5 transformation outside the food system and 23 individual food system measures, which I'll detail out in the next slide. Each FSM is evaluated individually and in packages. 5 packages, we have total of 5 packages, which also closely aligns with the United Nations Food System Summit action tracks, that is diets, livelihood, biodiversity protection, agriculture management, and cross-sector transformation, or the outside the food system transformation. We quantify their effects on 14 indicators specific to the Indian case, including the 4 dimensions of the food system. A bit of detail on the food system interventions, which we explicitly model. These are the 5 packages which I just mentioned. The first one is the dietary measure, which overall gives us the health impacts. If you see here, we transform Eat Lancet recommended diets, that is moving to a more leguminous, more high fruits and vegetable diet, less of protein sources from animal source foods, etc. We also have individual interventions which targets reduction of overweight and malnutrition by adjusting the calories of people or population above or below the BMI thresholds. BMI is body mass index. Second is the livelihood package, which is represented by 3 individual transformations, that is liberalized trade, higher minimum wages of agricultural laborers, increased labor engagement through capital substitution. Below panel shows few of the aligned Indian policies which are already existing in the current policy space. But yeah, we don't explicitly quantify these policies into the model, but in a way we model the direction which these policies leads us to the future. The third package is the biodiversity protection, in which we use land conservation measures, that is land sharing and land sparing, water conservation measures, biodiversity offsets. The fourth package is the agriculture management package, in which nitrogen efficiency is modeled, nitrogen from both livestock and also from the rice and agriculture activities, mitigation efforts on the rice cultivation, livestock management measures, manure management, etc. In the last package, which is the cross sector, we model slow population growth, in a sense that we assume that, okay, what will happen if the population is growing at a slower rate than currently prevailing. A high income driven socioeconomic development, we are assuming that, okay, in the future generations or in the future, people will be having more income in their hands to spend on food and also other commodities. Sustainable energy transitions, including the biofuel transition to second generation, and also timber cities, which means that a part of the construction materials are replaced by sustainable products, for example, wood-based, which again has implications, but we don't model that. Aligning with what my colleague Vartika has presented, we have 4 specific dimensions over here: health, social, environmental, and economic. And these are the 14 indicators which we explicitly evaluate the impacts on. Health includes underweight population, obesity, premature mortality, which is represented by million years of life lost. In social, we measure expenditure on food products, poverty rates, agriculture employment, which is one of the key innovation which we recently added into the model, because like earlier there was a lot of criticism that partial equilibrium model or this types of integrated assessment models is not able to answer the inclusion aspects, but we included that aspect too, and this is key innovation in this particular piece of work. The environmental part is the nitrogen surplus, crop diversity, biodiversity intactness index, water environmental flow violations, which comes from agriculture water use, requirements modeled in the model, FOLU GAG emissions. The last one, in the economic aspects, we model bioeconomy supply, which includes the quantities. For example, if we are moving to less plastic and more disposable, sustainable disposable stuffs. So that is an additional economy which we are creating out of the food system. So that is modeled explicitly. And also production cost. By production costs, we mean how much do we incur a cost on producing the food and livestock commodities that we are explicitly modeling, and how much cost is incurred while we transform to some changes. So this is the overall impact. I am sure anyone can see this, but overall, if you can see the color codes, the green is indicating a positive effect or the synergies, and red is indicating the trade-offs. Forget about the numbers, just see the indicators, and I think it's hardly visible. But the first panel is showing the measures of which we have included in the health sector, which I just mentioned. The second panel is the livelihood measures. The third panel is the biosphere measure. The fourth panel is the agriculture measures. And the last panel is the cross sector. When you see this figure, please keep your eyes glued on the dashed rows, that is the blue, and the 2 red, not the 2, in fact the last red will work. Because these are the 2 scenarios which will drive us to a hidden cost evaluations. So in this figure, what we see is when we bundle all the dietary measures, that is when we are moving to Eat Lancet recommended diets, plus we are also controlling the overweight and the malnutrition aspects, we are getting positive effects across the health, environment, and inclusion dimension. If you see the second top row, you see all the colors, though you can't see the number, I'm sure even I can't see, but these are all green. We do have 1 red in agriculture employment, which is reducing. That is mainly because there is some reduction in employment coming through decreased livestock production, because as we all know, I am sure many of you would have attended the Eat Lancet Diets session, and we all know that we are shifting towards a future which has less of animal-based products, and that shrinks the economic activity in the livestock sector. So that is leading to a certain amount of unemployment in this sector, which overall brings down the employment in the food and agriculture sector. The second one is the livelihood panel. In this, we see when we merge individual transformation measures. Example, liberal trade, we are assuming that India is moving towards a liberalized trade policy, as we all are, because India, I think the government is really promoting more of trade. And also, we are also promoting higher minimum wages for the agricultural labor. And also, we are assuming, since we have lot of labor, agricultural labor surplus, we are assuming to engage more of labor, we will need to shift to a more capital substitution is being substituted with labor. When all of these measures are being combined, then we lead to, of course, these have no health impacts because these cannot be accounted, the direct impact of these measures. But yes, for the environment, we do have some positive impacts, specifically because of the liberal trade, because based on liberal trade, what happens is a part of food production is moving to a geographical region which is more efficient in producing those products. For example, rice, because we know that in India, rice production is very water intensive. Sorry. The second, in case of minimum wage, which is the third row over here, we see there is some red impacts on this indicator, which is this indicator particularly talks about expenditure on food items, because we all know when we are increasing the minimum wage, the production cost of these producing our food is also increasing. We all know that increasing labor wage is actually a problem in India, and that is increasing the cost of production, and also that incurs a higher cost is totally transferred to higher prices. And when it is transferred to higher prices, then we need to spend more to buy a particular amount of good. So agriculture food expenditure increases. So that is one of the reds which we achieve through these interventions. But we also have some positive, because there is environmental is green, but inclusion is totally negative. So even if we are trying to enhance livelihood through specific measures, there can be some negative impact on the food system, which we do need to account when we promote any policy piece. The third, biosphere, although it has no impact on other dimensions, but it definitely has positive bearing on the environment. But in the agriculture thing, which is this panel, we see a lot of reds and very few greens. Greens are specifically related to agricultural employment, which increases due to these packages or due to these interventions, because we are really investing in mitigation activities in the rice and livestock sector. But we also have reds in terms of there is increase in withdrawals of water, and also there is high food expenditure, because that leads to an inflationary causes. Too hard to explain the big detail in such short time. I'm hoping the paper will soon be out and everyone can read it clearly in the paper. But when we see the cross-sector impacts, in this particular panel, we are only modeling the impact of external sustainable transformations which are outside the food system, and we see that there is some role to play about these scenarios, because we see that overall, although the poverty rates decreases due to income-driven changes, positive income-driven changes, but the agriculture employment is significantly declining. Because we all know, as we become rich, we want to shift to the service sector and industry sector, and we don't want to engage ourselves in growing foods. Rather, we believe in spending more on going to Starbucks or eating a pizza, and that also has an impact on agriculture expenditure. Now, the last panel in the row, this is the transformation which we are pitching for, which we are promoting as a sustainable food system transformation. And in this particular transformation, we are combining all these measures together, and we are saying, okay, what happens if we combine the diets, the livelihoods, the agriculture, the biosphere, and also the sustainable transformation outside the food system into one integrated policy framework? So do we achieve a better future, or we are worse off? Yes, we do achieve, because all are green, as you can see, but yeah, there is red too. So what's the red? That is very interesting. The red is overall the decreased agriculture employment, because when we move to sustainable transition, we are also moving into a better future where we have more income in our hands, and of course, we don't want to go and do kheti in our fields, and we want to go to restaurants and want to travel, so we are spending more on keeping ourselves better, but not growing food. Because I think that is what we have seen, because the rural employment in agriculture sector is also declining, because the younger generations are moving to urban areas and they don't want to engage themselves in agriculture because it is a very extensive work and also getting paid less. So yeah, so how these scenarios leads us to hidden cost, that is what we are waiting for. And here I reveal. So if we see here, we see this is a sustainable way, because mostly 13 indicators are green, but one is red. So definitely transitioning from a business as usual, which is the blue bar, to a sustainable future will lead us to somewhere. Either it will save cost or it will increase cost. So what happens? So the hidden costs, maybe I directly come over to the picture. So this is the overall hidden cost of 2050, which we are representing in 2020 terms. If you see this panel, this is the cost and benefits of each impact category in 2050 for the sustainable transformation pathway, in which we had 13 green indicators and 1 red. If you see the breakup here, it is the green indicates the environmental part, S is the social part, in which we mostly cover the poverty factors, and blue bar is the health factor. So these are the total costs. Now this first panel gives us the breakup of the first thing, which is the top 3 bars which you see. The second bar here gives us the values of this changes in these, and the third bar here gives us the total breakup of these, which might be visible like the names, but I'll try to explain this. So in this middle panel shows how the differences in the hidden cost will be if we transition from our business as usual scenario to the sustainable transformation pathway. And we see that when we transition to a sustainable future, our overall cost will decrease. This is the negative panel, and top of the bar is the positive panel. So all the values we see are negative, which means there is a significant reduction in costs that we will incur if we are actually moving to the future, which we are envisioning through this study. So this is the total cost bar. And in this panel, we see the health impacts. As my colleague already explained in his presentation, the health impacts for India are very high. Health impacts transitioning to the healthy diets. And if we are transitioning at all, we are able to achieve that, then our health impacts are going to reduce significantly. This also comes into place because our productivity as a labor, because we are healthy, so we are more productive now to work, our productivity improves, so definitely the cost to the economy reduces. This panel gives the further breakup, and we see here that nitrogen emissions, which is represented by the orange bar, is high. As we know, India is a global hotspot of nitrogen emissions or nitrogen surplus, and we are also contributing significantly to the global planetary boundaries, India and China. But yeah, even the green bar, that is land use change. For example, how do I explain this? Yeah, for the baseline scenario, which we are following, for example, the current trends, the intensity of rice and wheat production is very high. Even the livestock, if we go higher the income, we are expected to consume more of meat-based products, more of milk-based products because we have higher income. That is the consumption patterns which we discussed. That is the American consumption pattern. We are consuming more of that, and that has a significant impact. So that creates a lots of land use change, because we need more land to produce livestock. We need more land to produce rice and wheat. But if we are switching towards a healthy diet, which needs less of rice and wheat and more of coarse cereals, for example, legumes, more of millets, then land impact is little less. So there is avoided land use change assigned to it, and therefore we are saving significantly on land use change costs. And then comes the blue bar, which is the GHG emissions. Since we now have lesser rice, we now have lesser livestock production, we are also contributing to lesser GHG emissions pool. So we have significant amount of savings over here. And if we see the further breakup in the third bar, this one, we see that emissions from land's surface runoff of nitrogen is the highest, because we all know that our farmers are using more of nitrogen, more of NPK than that is required, and that is leading to a nitrogen surplus in the soil, in the air, in the water, through water runoff, and that is creating an impact. Now the third, shifting to this panel, we are showing how these costs are expected to change over the future. For example, starting from a 2020, how it will change in 2040, how it will change in 2050. That is what is explained, and we see that by moving to a sustainable future, we are able to significantly reduce the cost. As you see this bar, this is significantly lower than this bar, which seems as we transform towards 2050, we are saving more if we at all are moving towards a sustainable transformation pathway that we are showing in this study. So in this figure, this is showing how transitioning from a current trend, this is the current trend, and this is the FST, that is the Sustainable Transformation Future, how are the costs. So you see here the 2050 bar in the current trend is quite high, which is getting reduced significantly. But yes, health costs are still the highest, which means we seriously need to move towards a healthy diets. Now, previous to this session, there was some question on the cost engaged in transitioning. What is the transitioning cost? Of course, there is a transitioning cost associated to it, but if we at all transition, then we achieve this reduced health impacts in terms of cost also. And how do we actually do that? Because we talk about Generation Z, but yeah, we are also Generation Y, we belong to that category. And I think our children, or mostly our future, are not aware of pizza and what are burgers, but we introduce them to those food items. So if we choose a sustainable diet at home and we preach for that to our children, then I'm sure our Gen Z will also follow that. So yeah, a behavioral change is a significant component which can address these health impacts. So what are the key levers of change? Where should the policy focus on? And where are there rooms of improvement? In one aspect, we all know that if we don't pursue the policies in silos, rather we try to integrate all these policies into one individual framework, which I know is very hard, but yeah, we can always do. Slowly and steadily, we will surely get there. But we can specifically generate much lesser cost and much lesser bearing to our future generations. We still know that overweight issue is likely to persist in the future for India as we are getting more income. We are eating more food than required. Specifically, we are eating more of sugary and processed food, more of chips products. But yeah, shifting towards a healthy diets can help tackle this issue. And also, we also need to put our minds the micronutrient deficiency, which is currently prevalent in India. So the Millet Mission is, in a sense, addressing that. Dietary preferences and food choices, these are the ways in which we can surely move towards sustainable future. A lot of promotion, front pack labeling, a lot of efforts from the government, and also awareness at home and schools can bring that in. Nitrogen surplus on agriculture is going to a key factor, and this is going to exceed the planetary boundaries if we don't control this now. So it's high time that we strategize or re-strategize our fertilizer policies and also agriculture policies. Avoided land use change from sustainable choices can be a significant factor in which we can save. Food expenditures probably can increase due to the inflationary pressures, but yeah, we can deal with that if everything in the economy is rightly placed. Declining agriculture employment is a significant concern, and it is going to eat us up in the next future. So we need to ensure that agriculture is more remunerative for the laborers currently there, and also attract future generations towards the agriculture sector. Specifically, the rural non-farm sector should grow, and also the food and service sector should grow to absorb those surplus labor. Yeah, that's it. Thank you. Any questions?
I just have one question. You said in the sustainable scenario, agricultural land is declining, livestock is falling. Then how do you how did you define sustainable diet? And how are we eating without? The land is declining. You have to increase the productivity of land. You have to put in either some of the increased fertilizer or something you have to put. Livestock is also the dung which can be used as the nutrition, that is also not there. Now are we depending on imports of food? If we are not producing anything?
Thank you, ma'am.
Because that's a negative red one, right?
Yes. First, in this sustainable scenario, we are combining all the measures which we have rightly mentioned over here, which includes dietary transition, which includes livelihood measures, which include biosphere and agriculture management measure. Now, when we are transitioning to a healthy diet, as I already mentioned, we are moving.
How is healthy diet? I didn't get that.
It's defined as a eat. We have incorporated the shifting towards Eat Lancet diet, Eat Lancet recommended diet, which.
Can you just explain, because I didn't explain?
Yes, ma'am. Vartika, you want to join?
Okay, sure. Thank you. So the transitions to healthy diets is based on global and national scientific assessments, whereby the idea is that if there's diverse consumption of foods and a fair share of cereals, proteins, fibers, fruits and vegetables, nuts, all of these sources. So in the literature, they talk about these are healthy diets. And in the morning session here, we actually showed how global dietary recommendations are also very close to what we have in India. So the dietary recommendations from India, from the National Institute of Nutrition, also talk about the same breakup. So when we talk about transitions to healthy diets, the idea is that based on what you're consuming at the moment, you are shifting towards lesser cereal consumption, more consumption of whole grains, more consumption of protein sources, more fruits and vegetables, reduced oils, fats, all of those things.
But I just that's fine, the global recommendation, I just want to understand the Indian scenario, put in the context of the Indian scenario.
It is the same.
I think,
Yeah.
So our Indian diet is totally different from that of the Western diet.
Hold on.
So
She just explained to you
Yeah.
that it's using the NIN, food-based dietary guidelines. These are the Indian dietary
Okay.
guidelines.
Yeah,
And
so
the transition she just The transition she just referenced was the Indian transition. In the US, it's 500% reduction of red meat. That's in the US. In India, it's not 500% reduction of red meat. And so this is better aligning production to NIN consumptive needs. So the shifts, right? So what you get in this scenario is a movement towards the products that are defined by NIN as a healthy diet, increased agricultural efficiency, so there is an improvement in, there's a reduction in yield gap, improved nitrogen use efficiency and water use efficiency. So it's not that the reduced land is not because you're producing less food. You're producing more food, you're just producing less land.
That's fine. But that's what my question was. How are we producing more food when the land is reduced? So what kind of inputs are we feeding? I mean, so when you're recommending some sustainable practices, what do you have in mind? That's what my question was.
No,
right?
no, absolutely.
Now, do you have an answer for that?
So the assumptions, like a whole lot of assumptions, like Fabrice said, improvement in nitrogen efficiency, improvement in water efficiency, these are all the factors that help increase, like get better yields from the existing cropland. And that somehow contributes. But two other factors that majorly drive is in the sustainable scenario, we have different assumptions of GDP and population trajectories for the future. So the population is going to be different, the per capita incomes are going to be different, and that also somehow accounts for explains the lower future.
Just to add to Vartika what she explained, as I clearly mentioned, when I'm speaking of sustainable transformations, I am also including sustainable transformations outside the food system, which also means that, okay, population is growing slowly, so definitely the food demand requirement is lower than what is in the business as usual. I'm sure everybody might be aware that the government wants that population needs to be controlled, and that is what we are modeling. And there are multiple other drivers. Slow population growth, slow food demand requirement, plus transitioning to a healthy diet which is less land intensive is leading to the less land requirement, and that is how we are meeting the food demand.
So for the production practices, there's a whole set of plausible things that you could do and that you already are doing in India. For nitrogen, it's nitrogen use efficiency, right? It's not the application rate of nitrogen is more than the crops need, and so the problem is losses to water. For phosphorus, the problem is loss through erosion, so halting erosion, whether using contour systems, riparian buffers, for carbon, no-till systems or reduced till systems, agroforestry systems, anything that increases above or below ground carbon, agroecology, no-till, etc. For nutrient to precision systems, better targeting nutrient to crops if you want the high-tech approaches, better matching timing and need of the nutrient that the crop needs. There's really an infinite number of plausible solutions that can be brought in here. So it's maintaining production, increasing production in many cases, but really trying to rein in the losses.
Okay, fine, thank you.
I think I would add increasing yield to what you said.
Also, yes.
Some better nutrient efficiency, better soil management, storing carbon in soils, all of those yield to improve better soil health and carbon capture in soils. Those are highly autocorrelated. I mean, that's probably the biggest low-hanging fruit for many of us is how do we no-till as one example. Integrate animal livestock systems is great. I mean, I would caution. I don't think India is this case, but in the Netherlands, the animal to crop ratio is so high that they have too much manure. It's not the case here, but when we talk about animals and integrate animals, how do we integrate them? What is the quantity of manure that we use? What about green manure? I mean, I don't think we talk enough about green manure. There's a biomass question that you raised. How much what's your capacity to restore soil carbon if that biomass is being burned rather than being put back into the soil? These are all agroecological practices that can be used in modern and traditional systems that I think need to be explored and elevated.
Yeah, so that also adds to another question there. Now, there are labor who are moving out of the agricultural sector, and then when we are also having like this kind of organic farming system, it also requires more labor. Now, how did you address these trade-offs in that process? Because as in future, people will move out of agriculture, nobody will till the land. Now, what kind of systems do we have in place in order to achieve the sustainable transition by 2050?
Yeah, just to address this question specifically, in this particular piece of work, we have not explicitly modeled organic farming, but I can give a short example to explain. For example, this scenario in which we see this green bar in the agriculture employment indicator that is coming from high fruits and vegetables. Now, when we are pitching when we say that we should move to healthy diets, we are recommending a diet which is rich in vegetable, fruits, and nuts. Now, what happens when we promote more fruits and vegetables and nuts? We do have some positive impacts. That is, since these are labor-intensive production process, they engage more of labor, and there is positive employment effects over here. But we also do have negative impacts in terms of water environmental flow violations exceeds, because these producing fruits, vegetables, and nuts needs more application of water than the business as usual state. So we do have trade-offs and synergies, both aligned to individual measures, but what we are pitching for, we need to integrate all these piece of measures into a systematic integrated framework, and only that can lead us to a sustainable future. That's what we are saying.
Basically my question. So you have less labor, but then...
Yes, we have less labor, and that is the outcome. We are clearly indicating a red in less labor in sustainable transformation.
So sustainable transformation is not 100% achievable.
Yes, we are highlighting that we are transforming sustainably, but there is a trade-off in terms of agriculture employment, which needs to be absorbed in the food system.
Yeah, one question. I've recently come across this FAO study of cost of food systems. Have you contributed to that study, or in which they say there is 25 lakh crore is a cost of Indian food system, the existing. So how do you look at it? And
we have not directly contributed to the current version of the report, but we do aim to contribute in the 2024 version, and that is the whole exercise which we are taking. We are specifically looking how we transform to a sustainable future and how we can do the changes and incur less costs. That is what we are doing.
My question is it, it might have come from some data. Mm-hmm. What is the basis of the data that the Indian food system cost now is 25 trillion rupees annually?
So, yes, I just presented an hour ago on the same thing. For India, the current analysis for the current report is based on a whole lot of global data sets, not one data set, multiple global data sets for multiple indicators, but a lot of other modeling components as well. For the current report, for the next SOFA report on and for the India country chapter, we are looking at it more deep dive for India sources of data, and we are going to be contributing to that. So some of the
basic question is it realistic? The cost.
You tell us.
No, you are the science people. You are the modeling.
We play with numbers and we can come up with certain estimates, but realistic or not is something that
it's not.
Please suggest whether it is realistic or not, because we were not part of the exercise and we want to make the estimates better.
We can assess being the data.
That is what we are trying to do.
But we are sure that there is a huge cost which are already associated with the health impacts and the nitrogen pollution over surplus in India. So we definitely need to take care of that.
Sorry, can I add two things? One, on the employment side, that is a red not because it's a deficit, because it's going down. But when we have this same analysis at the global level, and we first presented it, all the agricultural economists in the commission, they were just like, why is it red? That's a green. For an agricultural economist, labor leaving agriculture is a sign of development. I mean, it's for decades. That's what, you remember, this was yesterday. No, of course.
Impact for India than for global, and this is what we are explicitly highlighting for the Indian case.
But I think but it's important to notice that red means that there is labor that is going to be freed up, but we talked yesterday about drudgery, that it needs to be absorbed elsewhere. That's a question. But I think what is useful in these scenarios that in a way they, when they say we play with numbers, they're clearly, they're selling in a funny way what they're doing.
Now when the labor leave agriculture, where will food
Well, according to this model, and it's great, this is a great discussion because, exactly, we want to find out what it is that doesn't resonate. But what this analysis tells us, there are enough people left behind to produce a according to the technologies that have been described here, but there are enough people left behind to produce all the labor-intensive stuff and the less labor-intensive stuff.
That's not the reality of India right
Okay,
now.
but sorry, but this is super helpful. No. But this is super helpful, and actually, I really appreciated this morning when you were saying, you know, I guess that one issue with these models is that you don't have the seasonal variation. You were saying, you know, if you don't want to burn the crops, you need to have people at that moment that take care of the residue. There are no people at that very moment. They might be in general, but they're not there at that moment, so you burn. So there are all kinds of things, but I think this is really an important thing to notice. And the second one, I actually believe that the hidden cost estimates are not for that final. They are actually there. No, they are for FST only. They are for the first 4 panels only without external transformations. That's what Stephen has calculated, which actually means you could reduce them even more. So what we're saying here is you have these 296 million, 300 billion a year of reduction in the hidden cost if you only do the minimal stuff in the food systems. If we also, as we hope, you know, India continues growing and there is a more equitable development and there are all these other good things that we know are part of the policy agenda, this could be even higher. So that I think is an important thing. I think you've been very modest in presenting the findings. There is actually much more that could come out of this.
So a bit no, Caterina, in what you said. Still the paradox lie. Because this is reality. You know, I also have, so, Caterina, what you said is a comment here on a note on reality is that because I'm also a farmer, as said Fabrice, we find that the labor is extremely difficult to find today because more and more of the exodus is happening to the urban clusters. And having said that, where would you grow food? The urban population would not have food to eat if you don't have food to grow. And that's from the rural sector, number one. Number two is, there are no practices. There are only far and few in between to embrace the systems wherein we call it water greenhouses to grow food in. We don't have many of those. My cousin is one of those who is an expert in the country to set up the largest greenhouse to grow food. But then again, we don't have many of those. So how are we going to tackle food security if we have this paradoxical problem?
Sorry, I don't want this to be a conversation with me. It's really, because I guess the whole point is really we're here to surface these kind of doubts that you have from the model.
Exactly.
Because that's the input they need to make sure that the modeling reflects, your concerns. So, thank you for all this.
And number two is that, before I hand over the mic, is that number two, who gets to dictate what is a healthy diet for the individual? Because we are that particular civilization is the longest surviving civilization. Don't teach us what is the best food from some agency. Thank you.
I tend to think if it is your own national agency, hopefully they reflect the needs of your own
Precisely the point.
But okay, that's not for us to judge. I think we can only go with the Indian recommendation.
So I'm curious about this a little bit. I want to probe this. But the message is very clearly, if you transition to a Western diet,
I've lived there, Fabrice, so I should know this. I've got 94% arthritis.
You don't look like the average. But, the public health costs of the Western diet are known. The environmental health costs of the Western diet are known. You guys should be up in arms about what Western overconsumption is doing as a pressure to your country. That's where you should be up in arms. Now, there's nothing radical in the dietary recommendation here. I hope that this morning we convinced you that the Indian diet is probably one of the best representations of what a healthy diet is.
You bet.
Great. So this is about.
I'm with you on this, on everything that you said, word to word. I'm with you on that. Even to go up in arms. Not only that, I'll go a couple of steps further, take this a couple of notches higher, and to say who would have to bear the cost. Is it the consumption? That means the consumer behavior, which drives the producers. Who are we producing for? This has been the paradoxical questions that we have to ask for, about 300 years? Roughly, let me not go into the politics here, but again, what is that responsible consumer behavior? I've said this at the UN in 2010. So I say this again, at this juncture, that we have to really ask ourselves as a humanity, as a global community, what is that responsible behavior? Who would share the cost? Who would share the responsibility? What is the way ahead? And that is why we are here.
And next time we go to the UN, we're going to go together. We're going to go with the big group. But so that's the first. Second, this is a model. and I think an explicit use for that is to get reactions, right? So that number, what's the number? Is 55, 65 in there?
66.
And what is that number?
65. Reduction in agricultural employment. 65.
But what's the unit of value?
65% reduction.
Okay. So there's significant increases, particularly. No, there's significant increase in the plant-based producers, your greenhouses. That's where the increase is. There's a significant reduction in animal production, which is leading to the net reduction, which is relatively small compared to the entire value. Now, so that's what the model is predicting. You don't see the increase in plant production, which was your point. But the other point with that is that if you feel that reduction is not something that you can tolerate as a country, then that's exactly where you should be saying, well, what policies do we put in place to secure that many people in farming?
But
Does your pathway call for maintaining X proportion of the Indian population in farming? And if so, how do you design policies that enable that to happen? And it's not one individual per hectare.
You're right. You're absolutely right. But there's only one part of the one small part of the equation there. Then you have the global equation too, as I mentioned earlier in my opening statement, that the responsibilities will have to be shared. The consumer patterns will have to be also addressed, which has an impact on the production side here, not only India but other countries as well. So in order to do that, what is the larger statement? That is the premise on which the model has to be based. Because if we don't get it right here in this smaller context, it's going to be a humongous mistake in a larger model. Correct me if I'm wrong in this. A smaller error here at this stage of the model will have an exponential mistake at the larger level and an impact as well. So I stop there because this can go on for a very long time.
Yeah,
But
add.
thank you for your research.
Just to add a bit, this is when we are evaluating all these food system measures, we are also assuming that all other global regions are transitioning to a similar pathway. So we also have global results, which I didn't present here, but I'm sure the paper will release soon, and you can have a look because the results are quite different for India and for global, and that is what we are explaining over here.
Thank you.
So the model's the model, right? In terms of the assumption that it takes, which I think we've been clear on, that there will be, that there's a margin of error around it. But I think that what it's showing in terms of the narrative that they put in and the assumptions they're using, I think the model results are correct. So what my question around your red is less about whether is that result correct. One, we need to understand the assumptions, fine. But I think more importantly is how do you guys want to change the scenario so that reflects what you as a country want? And that's less about the error. It's much more about, who's deciding what scenario we're running. So right now,
I'm with you.
We decide what FST was. Mm-hmm. Should a group of scientists decide what FST is? For us, it's exploring what is plausibly to happen under sustainability scenario. So I think we show that based on a sustainability scenario, you actually are able to hit. There are more synergies than trade-offs, for one. So let's stop by saying that everything's a trade-off and we can't do anything. There's potentially a trade-off on labor. How important is that to this community, and how would you want to deal with it?
How many farmers are sitting here? 3. So 3 in a group of about 35, 40? So what I'm saying is, do we have enough representation of the stakeholders in making the decisions moving forward? That's called co-creation. Yeah. We don't have a co-creation model. I'm sorry to point this out, because that's what I have set up is the movement which is bent on co-creation. Who are we to decide for the next couple of generations? What do they need to do?
That's exactly what we proposed this morning, by the way.
I wasn't here. Sorry, I missed you.
I just have one point.
Oh, you mean in the session?
Yeah. Okay. Conclude by saying, here are scenarios. We are proposing to this group that you reconvene and that you provide us with the scenario.
Yes,
So
statements.
you
Yes.
build the community that provides the scenario.
No, I think, see, we all have to agree. We know that there are limitations of the models. We are not saying that you have to be perfect. But then it is very important for all of us to understand the assumptions based on which the model results are driven. That has to be crystal clear because it's for Indian policy. I'm involved I was part of the Prime Minister's Commission on Green Accounting. We know that, we make mistakes. If you don't clearly specify the assumptions, they are like, the policy conclusions would be wrong. You can't just take, the assumptions have to be clear and we all have to accept that based on these assumptions, these are our results, these are the trade-offs, these are the synergies. We can't say that, there can't be any trade-off. No, there are trade-offs. If you want to achieve this is a trade-off. I think as researchers, we have to be very honest in our assumptions and the results. All of us would like to depend, but given that I'm part of the policy, I do interact with the policymakers, I know very much that if we don't present this, we are in danger. Because agriculture is such a sensitive sector, we are into global negotiations, and we do not want India to be underplayed at any cost. Already we are under the pressure because they talk about MSPs. You are saying like you have debate, you should not have MSPs, but then the farmers who are suffering, you have to actually handhold them as well. We have poverty issues, we have all sort of issues, right? And then as a country of like 1.4 billion people, it's like, if it is in Netherlands or Sweden or Norway, it's a social experiment, but we are actually land of 1.4 billion. So I think the policies have to be, and then we have to be honest about the assumptions. I'm sorry, but then I think we all know about it.
I think your point is very well taken, but the only point is that in a scientific conference, we present the whole list of assumptions and limitations, but this is like a public consultation and we did not want to get into the details of the model and how each parameter is valued and what's the coefficient value and what are the kinds of things it covers versus, covers the regional variation and does not cover. That is why we avoid that in a public consultation because not everyone in this room is a researcher. So that is the idea. But very happy to take this further in a technical session where we can delve into the very specifics of the model. That will help us improve our assumptions because once we present our assumptions, we get good feedback, but also the results that come out of it. So thank you for that comment. Is there anyone else? Oh, sorry.
I mean, you're completely right, and I'll up you one. I mean, when we look at the global scale of environmental change that we're confronted with, you look at the current cost of malnutrition or nutrition, you're absolutely right. We have a responsibility. One, we have a responsibility to engage, and two, we have a responsibility to get it right. But I'd say everything we're doing is mission critical. I mean, if food is 30% of climate and 80% of water, 7% of blah, 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 my spiel this morning, yeah, these decisions are critically important. And that's why I think more of this dialogue space, more of the critiquing, but also recognizing that we're confronted with some inconsistencies in the current system that need to be addressed.
Okay, I want to give space to other people to also raise their points. So there's just feedback. And yeah, is there someone that...
I was not there in the beginning, so I would like to know what is the transition technologies which you have. I heard CA is being considered as one of the conservation agriculture is into this model.
Not directly, no.
No, as one of the technologies being considered, you talk about reducing manpower and things like that. But CA, you'll have to be very careful. CA model is based on use of weedicides, which entirely mess up with the soil microflora and fauna. So you'll have to be very careful. It's a new thing which is being pushed as a transition model. You have to be very clear. If you can do CA without weedicides, then well and good. Otherwise, you should totally keep it out because we are talking about food systems. Food systems, basically nutrition comes from the soil. If you are going to mess up the soil, you are going to further, you are only now talking about nitrogen,
yes,
but you are going to do further messing up.
And it also has implications on labor requirements for production as well. Thank you. Point is well taken.
Yes, please.
Just a question. Yeah, I just wanted to actually clarify something. In the scenario where we are looking at sustainable transition, are we looking at that by 2050, the land holding sizes will increase? Because when we are saying that the total land under cultivation is going down, productivity is increasing, food production remains, let's say, pertinent to the population at that time. So we are looking at larger farm sizes, or is that how you would imagine it, or?
Not necessarily larger farm sizes,
Yeah.
because I mean that does not.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Because this also just goes back with, if we are looking at like technology-based solutions, some of them will only become feasible when, let's say, there are some technologies of scale available. So how does that, so that's the one thing I wanted to clarify. And if that is happening, then are we afraid of some further lock-ins into the system that might then impede transition at a later stage if and when things need to change? And this then leads to the second question, are we exploring some level of feasibility analysis for some of these pathways? For example, like an intervention or an agriculture pathway perhaps has more feasibility if there is supporting environment that is provided, whereas, let's say, shifting to a healthy diet itself is a little bit more dubious when we're looking at a sustainable. So just 2 points.
Yeah, I'll take the second question first. Deciding on the feasibility, that's the exact intention why we want to explore the outcomes of each individual measures across these 4 dimensions, because that gives us a holistic idea. Okay, if suppose agriculture interventions is improving the environment sector, does it have impact on the economic sector or on the social sector? But from our result, we do see that there are trade-offs associated with agriculture. It is not totally sustainable if we implement only the agriculture measure and we don't include other supporting demand side strategies. So that is important, and that's what we are pitching for, that we need equal attention for both demand and supply side measures. Only then we can achieve the sustainable transformation. And also we need more responsible future populations who are more aware of the environment, who are more aware of the choices they made in terms of consumption, and definitely consumption leads to production and production leads to consumption. So we are speaking on both the sides, and that's the point we make. Yes, regarding the land holding size, here when we say that agriculture employment is decreasing, we don't at all mean that if agriculture employment will decrease, the land holding size will increase, because we are saying that the land requirement from baseline is lesser in the sustainable transformation pathway because we are moving to a healthy diet, but holding size will totally depend on the socioeconomic classifications or socioeconomic changes which is happening at the ground level, which we don't model explicitly. But we are saying that, okay, if there are surplus labor in the agriculture sector, that is expected to move out from the agriculture, but we also equally highlight that sustainable transformation outside the food system is very important to contain those surplus labor which are moving out. So we need more of a service sector, because we have seen in the COVID that people have moved back to agriculture, they have left the job and they have moved back to agriculture. So if agriculture employment is decreasing, the service and the industrial sector should be enough capacitated to absorb those surplus labor. Only then the income level of the people can be kept intact.
I had a connected question with land size and all that. So just out of curiosity, right now our population is 1.4 billion. By 2050, how much it will be?
In our current model, it is leading to 1.61 billion. So
1.61
yes, we are accounting that population change. That is only in the baseline, but in the sustainable transformation pathway, we are modeling a slow population growth, which is lower than 1.6 billion.
Then land size
1.53 something.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay.
I have a closing comment.
Go ahead.
I do appreciate the amount of work that you
Can we join for a group photo? Can we join for a group photo?